Okay. Okay. Gotcha. Makes sense. Good morning. Whew. Glad everybody's here this morning. Good to see everyone. Hope you found a seat. I can't see online. Yeah, please. They don't know the difference. Okay, Romans chapter 1. We finished last week talking about God's wrath, and we got all the way up to roughly verse 28, 29. Before we moved on to that, I want to pause for a little bit and say, do you have any questions or comments for me about things we talked about last week when it came to sexuality? Because I said next week I want to start out by saying if you have any questions. So do you have any questions for me? Or comments, whatever. If not, we'll move ahead. But anything at all about, good morning, about sexuality? Anything at all? Nope. All right. All clear as can be. Good. I've read many, many articles and arguments and essays, commentaries on these issues, trying to make sure I'm also understanding it correctly. I just don't know a way around it, which to me seems to me the overwhelming sense, clarity of that, which I said last week, which is every single time a Jew or Christian talks about sexuality, they all go back to one fundamental text. There's always one text that sets a tone for everything. Even even Jesus in Matthew 19, of course, and that is Genesis 1:24. In the beginning, God made them male and female. And they said, for this reason, they leave and cleave together, as it were. So that verse, that understanding of Genesis, sets the tone. It's the foundation of all Jewish sexual ethics. To this day, it is outside of really, really leftist, liberal, progressive. You know, but to this day, every Jewish literature ever composed in the history of Judaism until about the 60s, and then every Christian document until about the same time, they all went back to Genesis. And then, so Paul presents here something that's very uncontroversial. But what stands out, one more time, what stands out is we have very few instances in all the Greco-Roman world where what we would call lesbianism is condemned, but Paul does condemn it. Secondly, while there are certain philosophers that condemned homosexuality, they typically, if they ever did condemn it, typically they condemned it because there was a young person who was being taken advantage of. Well, they wouldn't say that. It would be much more like, oh, you're running after all those boys, you're ridiculous. Or they would criticize the person who likes to receive uh, anal sex. That's basically what they would call it. The person who likes to receive it. Those people they frowned upon, not because it was necessarily immoral, but because it effeminized the man. Paul does none of that. Paul doesn't say one word about boys, children, little boys or girls. He doesn't talk about passive versus active partners, not right here. In Corinthians, he does, and I mentioned that back when we did 1 Corinthians 6. He actually mentions both people, the passive and the active partner. Again, that's not unique, but it is bizarre. Not for a Jew, though. What I'm saying is, in Judaism, what I'm saying is people who come at this and interpret it, that's not what Paul meant. He really had boys in mind and girls and exploitation, and that's all he really had in mind. That's what everyone thought in the ancient world. I'm saying that's demonstrably false. Jews did not think that. And in fact, even Gentiles, I said last week, even Gentiles, the typical assumption was that only they did that. Jews themselves never did that. Back to Genesis 1, and of course Leviticus, which says it's an abomination. But so all to say is Paul is universal in his condemnation, and for him, the whole point is not about homosexuality. That's another thing I made last week, which is a shame to me because they think so many people think Christianity is about sex. I mean, the bottom line is, if you say I'm a Christian, they go, really? You don't like gay people? I mean, the first thing out of their mouths is sexuality. And that's a shame. I used to work with a woman, and we talked about Christianity. We were having lunch. This is years ago. And she said, yeah, I grew up Catholic and so forth. And I go, okay, really? So I was looking forward to a good conversation maybe about Jesus coming up. But she goes, yeah, but I'm not doing it anymore. I said, really? No, no. I mean, I could never, ever follow a religion where you can't have sex outside of marriage. I go, huh. That's it. That's the deal breaker. Not if you rose from the dead. I can't have sex with whatever I want to. And I believe you. My point is that's a shame to me. And so when Christians, in my to be benefit of the doubt, if Christians talk about sexuality and go, the Bible said, and they start waving their Bible at them, it can lead this impression that that's all Christians really care about. And even in this particular context, that's not all Paul cares about. Paul's saying he's trying to apply something that he says, here's one of many plethora of examples that demonstrates God let people over and said, fine, do what you want to do. But it's in a Jewish framework, it's disgusting. So it's an example of and all the Jews go, hey man, they're so horrible, those Gentiles, It's the next part where he's going to get them. The first part's not controversial, but today it is very, very controversial. So yes, ma'am. Good. So what did Jesus specifically say about homosexuality? Nothing. The term homosexuality was invented back in the 19th century. So no one before that time in English used the term. Of course, homo means the same in Latin and Greek, well, from the Latin from the Greek. And so it means the same sex. So he didn't use that term. So they used other terms to demonstrate, to talk about when a person was both attracted to a person, we might call orientation. They didn't have the word orientation, but they believed in it. At least we have evidence that ancient authors talk about things like a proclivity and orientation. They didn't use the word, but they had the idea. They had the idea of homosexuality and bisexuality, but they didn't have those terms. And so they used different terms for that. And so they would say things like in 1 Corinthians 6, and he says these people are people who are arsekenotoi. It's two Greek words that almost certainly Paul makes up, and he's quoting the Greek version from Leviticus when he says male who lies with a male. And so he's using terms that in his mind from his Bible, and he's using a Greek way to making up a word of this kind of person. Now, the word he makes up is probably from Leviticus, but arsenos means weak one. That was commonly used. Weak one meant usually the passive partner in a homosexual relationship. How do we know that? We look up the word every single time the term is used in all literature in the ancient world. And so oftentimes that term for weak one meant the passive partner. And the person is a strong person or the active person, Paul then uses the term right after that for that. And so they had terms they would use for. Another one was they made up a word for like we would call transgender or sometimes, of course, even a homosexual. We would say they would call him a girl boy. They put two Greek words, goniandros. That means just it's like female male. They had made it together. They just put it together. Oh, sorry. So Jesus didn't use any of these terms. Correct. Jesus did not use those terms. That's right. Jesus never spoke about. He did not condemn or condone that behavior. He never spoke about. He never spoke about particular sexual immorality. He used, now this is the problem too, is Jesus almost certainly spoke Aramaic. We have Greek from the New Testament, the Gospels. So the actual Aramaic terms he used, I don't know. But from the Greek, from the Gospels, we have the terms he uses are the word porneia. For example, in Matthew 19, don't get divorced except for porneia. Now we usually translate that sexual morality, but porneia, for a lot of reasons, I would say, the Greek term porneia, basically every scholar agrees, is the term that Jews used who spoke Greek to refer to any kind of sexual immorality. And that's why your English translations typically just say sexual morality. Sometimes people translate porneia adultery. That's not good. Moicheia is adultery. That's the specific sexual sin. So if Jesus used the word, the Aramaic term that's equivalent to porneia, that's the closest we get to anything sexual or immoral. You might say, well, David, you don't know what Jesus thought was sexually immoral. That's exactly right, because he doesn't say exactly what it is. He doesn't. But what, I don't know of one historian who doesn't do this, they would say, until you have reason to think Jesus thought differently than every other Jew of the time, we assume he thought like any old Jew would. And every single piece of literature we have from before, during, and after the time of Jesus that's Jewish, when they speak about porneia, on that list are always list of all the things the Gentiles, those dirty Gentiles do, as they would say. So he never says that term. Sorry, real quickly. He never says that term. He never speaks specifically. What he does speak about is when he quotes from Genesis 1, that male and female, and he speaks against porneia, and that's the closest, if that makes sense. Yeah, that's right. But so the term itself, good question. Right. So does Jesus address gay marriage? Well, technically no, because gays couldn't get married. So even in a time period, that'd be like addressing nuclear holocaust. There's no nuclear bomb. So he didn't address something that couldn't happen. But implicitly, we would say it applies to that because Jesus cites what every Jew always cited, which is Genesis 1, like we talked about. In Matthew 19, he says, "And God made from the beginning." He said, "Haven't you read, from the beginning, God made male and female for each other." So for them, they go, of course, everybody would agree, everybody in the Jewish context, that that's just as normal as saying God exists. Everyone believed that in sexuality. So that means, by implication, anything outside of that is porneia. So, and I said that in a sermon back when I did in 1 Corinthians. That means zoophilia or bestiality. That means incest. That means, I mean, on and on it goes. Sex outside of marriage altogether. Sex inside kinship lines. That's from Leviticus as well. All these things were, in the Leviticus, the term in Hebrew we translate is abominable. And so it's an abomination. So it's disgusting to them. It's horrible. So he doesn't address gay marriage, but the implication is any marriage whatsoever, any union whatsoever, any sexuality whatsoever outside of male and female is not how God designed us. This is not how he designed it. Yeah. Oh, gotcha. So could you say because Jesus is part of the Trinity, everything God says, like in Genesis, that he was a part of? Y- yeah. I yeah, and maybe afterwards we can chat. I'm not as persuaded that Jesus was aware of everything. I'm not as persuaded that Jesus was omniscient in his earthly ministry. I think Jesus was not. So like who touched me? Not even the Son of Man knows when the end of Mark 13. But in that sense, yeah, I think they're in cahoots. Yeah, I think they have the same view. I hear theologically, yes. Yeah. Yes. So I got you. So yeah, for example, under the so-called Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through 7, and also in Luke 6, the Sermon on the Plain, Jesus talks about there's certain times where he brings up commandments like it's, I know you've heard, do not murder, but I say to you, don't even hate your brother. He mentions several things, but Jesus never says, I know you've read it said it's an abomination to have sex outside of marriage or whatever, homosexuality, to use our term. Male with male, they would say male lying with male is what they would say. But I say to you, he doesn't say that. So the assumption is sexually those kind of ethics. Now, I think that to a degree that's true. That's an argument from silence. I think to a degree that's persuasive. But if you said that's always persuasive, that is, if Jesus didn't mention it, therefore it still upholds. That means Jesus believed in kashrut, the dietary restrictions that we shouldn't be eating pork. And I don't know of any scholar who thinks Jesus thought he himself probably didn't eat pork, but I don't have any reason to think Jesus himself, part of being my disciple, is that you also can't eat pork. So I can list a long list of things of going to the temple. Anyway, but that's certainly possible. Yeah. Just as just from a pure historical, I mean, if you're just a Satan worshiper, if you're just an historian, I find it inconceivable to think Jesus would have ever disagreed with that common Jewish assumption that God designed man and woman together. I mean, it's just in the bedrock of their understanding of sexuality. And then that comes out in the times whenever Jesus does talk about it, like in Matthew 19 and Matthew 19 is the longest section. That's why I mention that one the most. Um, so yeah, no, it doesn't mean it's not controversial today, and it is. I just, with grace and gentleness, we have to say, at minimum, as Christians, we want to try our best to understand what it actually teaches. Let's get that first right. And so, if someone you hear say, "No, no, no, all Paul had in mind was little boys. All Paul had in mind was that," you have the right to say, "I'm so willing to be persuaded. That's wonderful. Can you show me where he says that?" Let's look at the text, because the text is the chief authority, it seems to me. And so, for Christian faith and practice, just what does it say in the text? Well, that's just what everyone believed. Okay, can you demonstrate that? How do you know that everyone believed that? And why didn't they say that? And why is it all Jews disagree with you? And what about Jesus in Matthew 19? What do you? And I've asked people that before when they've. I was at church before where I got enormous heat, and eventually I had to resign because of this exact issue. And I had many conversations with people. Said I'm willing to be wrong. I mean, I don't. I wish it didn't matter. Have sex with monkeys. I don't care. I mean, I so wish it didn't matter because I don't want this drama in my life. I'm trying to understand the text well and live under its authority. And so, please, I'm not trying to be just some crazy fundamentalist either. Just show me, please. What do you do with text like this? And in my experience, 100% of the time, they don't know the text. They don't know how to interpret them. They don't. The bottom line every time in my experience is limited. The bottom line across the board, every single time, it came down to two things. It has nothing to do with the Bible. Nothing ever. Because I kept over lunch and coffee, I would say, do you have your Bible with me? Came down to one or two things. My niece is gay, my husband's gay, my son's gay, my whatever's gay, and I can't send them to hell. Why would you want to send them to hell? I can't say that. I love them too much. And the second reason is because if I speak against it, they'll go kill themselves, and I can't be morally responsible for their suicide. That's it. It always came down to one of those two things. And I was at a church where I had people who, what I would argue, sided with Jesus and Paul, and they had relatives who were gay and lesbian. And they still said, yeah, this is how we live with it all the time, and we love them, but da-da-da. We had people who had relatives who just despised everything about just seeing me because they were convinced I hated them and their kids and wanted them all to burn or something, no matter what, no matter how I tried to love on them. And so I get it, this issue, and we'll move on if you want, but it's a very deep, passionate, personal, like abortion is for people. And I respect that very much. It just seems to me, and you can have a different view, you can. Christians disagree on this. It just is my view. I'm a Protestant, and I believe that when it comes to what we find authoritative, the biblical text is the chief authority in life for faith and practice. And then it's reason and so forth. Experience is at the very bottom. So I don't start with my feelings or what I experience in life and make it the chief authority. The reason why is in my theology, my view is that my experiences can be wrong and my feelings can be mistaken. And so my view is that feelings don't make reality. Reality makes reality. And I want to decide what's based on truth and reality first, and then decide whether my feelings line up to it. My feelings matter, but they might be mistaken. Like if I go to a thermostat and it says 72 degrees, well, I'm going to listen to it, as it were. I'm going to look at it, but it might be wrong. It might be broken. No. It says 72, therefore it created the ambient weather of 72, the temperature. That's not how it works. It doesn't create temperature, it reads it. And so we're in a culture now where feelings create reality. I do disagree with that, respectfully. I do disagree with that. And so I come to the text and go, understand that. So where I agree with people very much, very, very much, is anybody who says, I too, David, and I'm just being as open as I can. If someone says, I also agree that the authority of the text is chief, well, then we already have so much in common because most people disagree with me on that. So I come going, at least that's the chief authority. And so then I want to go, can you at least persuade me then? Because now why is that? Why is that? David's just a bigot. He's closed-minded. That might all be true. I don't think so. I don't think I am. I think it's because, at least on a conscious level, the reason why I'm this way is because my conscience tells me, based on my work and research and prayer and all this, that this is the way I'm supposed to do it, which means I think I'll be held accountable by God. I think I'll be judged by God by what I do with what His text says. And so I've spent my entire life and career in 3 advanced degrees trying to read it carefully. But not everyone agrees with that. They go, no, David, I hear what you're saying, but you're closed-minded and the Spirit moves me and it trumps you and your interpretation. And okay, but we do disagree. I mean, I disagree. And so someone can say, real quickly, someone can say, well, my view is blank, and that's fine. And I don't ever feel persuaded to change someone's mind when they say, here's my opinion. I go, okay, God bless. I mean, why would I want to change? I don't give a rip. The only time I ever start perking up more is when they say, what Paul believed was, what Jesus believed was, what the New Testament teaches. I go, oh, now you're my playground. Let's talk. Let's play. That's my playground. Let's do this. Not argue, but like, oh, wonderful. So tell me, what do you think he believed? Now we're going back to history and text. Do you see the difference? Now, I'm not there to fight with him. I'm just going, oh, well, then why do you think Paul think that? Awesome. So tell me, wow, I have a radically different view. How did you come to that conclusion? Who are your favorite scholars? What Greek? Talk to me. And then in scholarship, we do that. But for the rest of the world, no one does that because they don't. It just means you hate my niece, you hate my nephew, you hate my son. And no, I don't. I don't really hate anybody. I didn't design this. So I'll go ahead because no extra charge for that sermon. Is that okay? Anyway, I mean that. I don't hate anybody. I love them. And Jews, including Jesus, and Christians never talked about orientation. They don't. That was not the issue. It's not you can be attracted to squirrels. There's no sense of the orientation is sinful. What they talked about was behavior. And Paul explicitly says that. They traded the natural for the unnatural. They lied down. They did things with their body. And so it's about behavior, not orientation. One last thing I said last week. Let's see. I didn't bring my Greek with me. I'm trying to remember now where I said. Oh, I think I said, yeah, verse 27. I think men committed shameless acts with men and received in their own person the due penalty for their error. And I said maybe that's sexual transmitted diseases. Maybe. Maybe it is. I didn't give the other option, which is possible too, that he means that the penalty that they're receiving is God leaving them to the fiery burning passion against other men. That is the penalty, that you have a fiery passion to do something, Paul would say, that everyone knows you shouldn't be doing. So whatever that penalty is, we're not sure. And so Paul's point, verse 28, instead of seeing creation and worshiping the Creator, and they didn't even worship the creation. They worship created things made up, statues and idols. They wouldn't hug poles. I mean, it's just crazy. They were filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, covetousness, and malice. Now, he's going to give several things here. They're all in the, I get bogged down. This is what we typically call, we always call in scholarship, this is called a vice list. In the ancient world, they had virtue list and vice list. And these were standard ways to teach young boys the good life, the moral life. And so you had your vice list was don't do these things. The virtue list was things you ought to do this. Goes all the way back to, I think, even to Aristotle had these things. The virtues you live up to. And then later on, Jews borrowed the same idea. Christians borrowed the same idea. They had virtue and vice list. Now, I say that because when we read virtue and vice list as a genre, scholars always tell you, the goal is you don't read these and think these are exhaustive. This is not every single conceivable sin or vice. It's just a vice list. It's supposed to evoke, disgust. One Jewish author in one other document, not in the Bible, he lists 120 vices. I think you try to be exhaustive, Brandon. That was 10% of your problem. I mean, think how long your list would be. 50%? Oh, 50%? So you're at 240? I'm just joking. Everyone's like, I didn't know he was such a sinner. This is really bad. We need to pray. Right now, this moment, the world. So vice lists are supposed to make you go, oh, these are horrible. Now, of all the things they could list in a vice list or a virtue list, Paul does this in Galatians 5, Galatians 6. It's all over the New Testament. 1 Corinthians 5 and 1 Corinthians 6, he lists vice lists and virtue lists. The point is to pay attention. Notice in this list, he didn't say anything about sexuality. He's already talked about that. These are vices that typically have to do with social interaction and being arrogant and haughty. So societal problems. See if this rings a bell for today, right? I mean, of course, being wicked or evil, those are very similar. Covetousness, of course, the coveting, you're not supposed to do that, even in the Old Testament. Malice toward your neighbor, of course. Envious of people, murder, strife, deceit, craftiness. They're gossips, slanderers. Those are basically the same thing, basically. Slander means to speak evilly of. Gossip means you do that behind your back. Hate God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, rebellious toward parents. They're the worst. Rebellious teenagers. Foolish means they live without God. Faithless, heartless, ruthless. I mean, so he's given this picture. This is real bad. This is what happens in society when God lets them loose to do what they really, really want to do in life. Go for it. And they treat each other with absolute horrible disdain. I mean, little footnote, if my little sermon point. It's amazing how often in my life I keep going back to the Bible, but certainly the New Testament, when it talks about humans. It's amazing to me that it's 2,000 years later, and you could write this right now. I'm not being Mr. Pastor. I'm just saying it's staggering to me that you read this and you go, one of the reasons I'm a Christian, one of the reasons I find Christianity true is because I think Christianity best diagnoses the human condition. I really believe that. I really do. I believe that, which is one of the reasons why I think people are not basically good. I don't think like the Buddhists that everything is illusion, or the Hindus as well. It doesn't matter. I don't believe that. I believe they're full of different things. Now, does Paul have in mind that every single person on the planet does nothing but these things? Certainly not. Certainly not. He's not saying every individual pagan or Jew is this way. He's saying it's everywhere. Society's full of this stuff. And then verse 32, they know God's decree. That is, something tells them they shouldn't be doing this. And that those who deserve to die, that is, they deserve God's punishment. God's punishment. Yet they not only do them, but they applaud others who practice them. But isn't that true? Even when your conscience says I shouldn't be doing this, Even that's the case, you still applaud people. Um, my son has taken over my YouTube channel, and now he got me on TikTok and stuff. If you don't know what that is, you're a Christian. Bless your heart. And but the goal was, because we have there are over a billion people on TikTok and a lot of people on YouTube channel, and the goal is to share reflections, hopefully to share the gospel. It would help them to watch more material and Bible studies. And that's the goal. It's to share the gospel. And so I had an idea the other day. There's a show, I don't hardly watch any TV, and there's one show I started watching. I've watched every episode, called Welcome to Plathville. It's a show on TLC. And Plathville, I started watching it because Elaine told me about it, because she loves all that drama. No, but she did tell me about it. She goes, there's these people who stay at home. They're from Georgia, Cairo, Georgia, and they're stay-at-home people. They haven't been in the real world. They don't have cell phones. They hardly ever wear shoes. And that sounds horrible, like they're nothing but wild animals. But they're not wild animals. They're sweet, but they're conservative Christian. And I'm always interested how Christians are perceived of the media, because it's always bad. And so I'm always wondering, I wonder if this is another bad example, and it basically is. Not all, not all. Well, it's basically a thing about what happens when they go out into the real world. And wouldn't you know it, shockingly, none of them act like Christians or Jesus, and they all abandon what they were raised in. Every one of them. When they go out to the real world, they're set free from the prison of control. Now, part of it is because the mother is a very controlling narcissist. And so this emotive compulsive. So I told Hayden a few weeks ago, I said, it'd be interesting to do a YouTube channel to do reflections on that show, because as we watch it sometimes with the family, you knowing me, I turn almost everything to a teaching opportunity. I go, okay, and I pause it. Okay, what just happened right there? This is called bad boundaries. She said this, he said that, don't do it like that, or whatever. And so we just recorded this yesterday. And in one of the episodes, one of the sons who found his newfound freedom, he's out in California by himself. He's 21, and he's cussing, and he's drinking. He's kind of drunk. He goes to a strip club. He's so excited. And he brings his older brother, who doesn't want to go there. But he goes, and older brother's wife says, come on, we can do this. Come on, let's experience, and we're living the good life. And the brother goes in there, and he's looking down the whole time, and finally he walks out. And I did a lot of reflections on that YouTube, on that one, how it just, in a nutshell, you see what happens with morality. The part of it says, I shouldn't be doing this, and you have to be coaxed. You have to be cajoled. You never have to be cajoled to do the right thing. Someone gets a flat tire, we ought to do that. No, come on. We don't know what let's hold our hand. Do you have to persuade people to do the right thing? You don't have to persuade. You just go, that's the right thing to do. You may not always know what the right thing is, but there's a sense of that feels right. But it's the wrong thing to do. We usually have to have a lot of company. People want to get drunk together. They want to do drugs together. They want to get stuff together. And so these things go together, and that's sad and unfortunate. That's the point, Paul's point is, they don't only just do these things, they celebrate it. Woo, they're living the good life. And I talked about that, the good life. The good life means I have fun and I look at naked people. I don't get it. Okay, chapter 2, verse 1. I'll move on quicker. If you look on your handout, we're going now to, so God's wrath is against the Gentile world, chapter 2, verse 1. Therefore, you have no excuse, whoever you are, when you judge others. Now, there's the left jab you didn't see coming. So it's the homosexual stuff we would call homosexuality. That's no controversy there. It's the last part. Now he's setting up whoever's judging those people. So while they're in the background cheering, go get them, Paul, those dirty, rotten sinners, every single person who's ever condemned them, judged them, you don't have an excuse either. Because in passing judgment on another, you condemn yourself, because you, the judge, are doing the very same things. Does that mean the judge has to commit all those vices? No. The point is, you also sin and do wrong things. Now, he's going to set up a long argument, and it's a pretty long argument, in my opinion, for a couple chapters, what we call chapters. He didn't write these with chapters, but he's going to set this whole thing up to set up fellow Jews who think that they won't be held accountable by God at Judgment Day because they have the covenants. They have a special relationship with God. And Paul's going to set them up to say, that is not enough. What you do matters. And if you're judging people, that matters a lot, because you're judging people hypocritically. Does that sound like Jesus in Matthew 7? Don't judge lest you be judged. First, get the 2x4 in your own eye, then you get the speck in your own brother's eye. Okay, anyway, it's the same thing here. Verse 2, you say, we know that God's judgment on those who do such things is in accordance with truth. That is with righteous God, what God wants. You say that. Do you imagine, whoever you are, that when you judge those who do such things, that you do them yourself, you will escape the judgment of God? Now, who does Paul have in mind Greeks here, Gentiles, or Jews? We're not real sure. He's certain philosophers, but right now he's saying whoever ever looks down. If you got really excited at speaking against them, other people, oh my goodness, do you think you're going to escape God's judgment? Verse 4, or do you despise the riches of his kindness and forbearance and patience? And there he probably means, as is often the case in Judaism, he means he's being patient and forbearing you. He's giving you a chance to repent. Do you not realize that God's kindness is meant to lead you to repentance? He's being patient. He's not judging you right now because he's giving you a chance to say, oh my goodness, I've blown it, I'm sorry. But by your hard and impertinent heart, you're storing up, and Jews thought they stored up good things for themselves, right? Righteous things in the world to come. He's saying you're storing up wrath for yourself. Whew, that's a bad savings account on the day of wrath as God's judgment, when God's righteous judgment will be revealed. That sounds like the day of the Lord in the Old Testament, Amos and Hosea and Joel, that God's going to reveal the wrath and judgment. Verse 6, for he will repay according to each one's works or deeds. To those who by patiently doing good seek for glory and honor and immortality, he will give eternal life. While for those who are self-seeking and obey not to truth but wickedness, there will be wrath and fury. And I'll keep finishing and I'll come back up and reflect on that. There will be anguish, distress for everyone who does evil, the Jew first and also the Greek. Notice the Jew first and the Greek. Earlier, Paul said something else was for the Jew first and the Greek second. What was that? Remember that early in the chapter? The gospel. It's the power of God and salvation to the Jew first and to the Greek. They get the power of salvation first. God's message comes to them first, and guess what also comes first? Judgment. All right, there's an extra accountability. But glory and honor and peace for everyone who does good, the Jew first and also the Greek, for God shows no partiality. And the Greek term for partiality, it doesn't show up anywhere before Paul says it here. He probably means something from the two Greek words from the Hebrew word. He shows no special face. He doesn't show partiality. So back to verse 6. So to those who patiently do good seek for glory and honor. He almost certainly, what Paul has in mind is, which is the common Jewish belief, that is, God will judge people based on what they do. It's a common belief. Jews hold a similar view to this day that do believe in judgment, and then Muslims believe the same thing about their understanding of Allah or God, is that God will judge people based on what they do. Paul has that basic idea. He will judge you based on what you do. In addition to that, Paul has the additional view, not only is that what's going to happen, you're going to fail. And later on, he's crescendoing all the way up. So the Gentiles fail miserably. They're so dumb they worship poles and stick and then have sex with, it's crazy. But you others who judge them, later on he's going to say, even the Jews who have the law. He's going to crescendo all the way to what we call chapter 3 when he says, all have sinned. Everybody. He's get big amount on everybody. But he's saying the first problem is God will judge us based on what we've done in the flesh, our behavior toward others and toward him. He will judge us based on that. The second problem is, we're all of us have messed up. And if you're going to judge, that's bad news. And of course, later on, he's going to set up, but God has done something, to use N.T. Wright's term. God set into motion a rescue operation to help us very much. So here he's saying, of course, God will repay. He will, that's right. And the ones who are trying to do good, the glory and honor probably means God will glorify them, meaning God will say, well done. He'll give them honor. Immortality is a great Greek word. They love that term for living forever. But in Paul's theology, that has to do with being a resurrected body. Remember the 1 Corinthians 15? The mortal must put on immortality, not immorality, that's bad. Immortality, the perishable must put on the imperishable. But that he's appealing to people who know that term. So that's what God will grant them, or give eternal life. Life that won't, and here he probably means life that won't stop, because it's immortal. The body is immortal. But other ones that do bad things all the time, they're going to get God's judgment. In a nutshell. So he's not told, I've already given you a preview. If you're a Christian, you know how Paul ends on this. But if you didn't know that, I'm giving you a preview. So he's setting up the situation where Gentiles in general are sunk. People who judge them in general are sunk. But you think you're doing good. If I'm a good person, I do the right things. Yeah, are you though? Because if you've done anything evil, even if you judged people who did things evil, it's not going to be good for you. Verse 12. All who have sinned apart from the law, all of a sudden he brings up the law, and he means probably Torah or the Mosaic covenant, will also perish apart from the law. And all who have sinned under the law will be judged by the law. It's not the hearers of the law who are righteous in God's sight, but the doers of the law will be made right or justified. That's a common Jewish sentiment. This is not some unique Pauline introduction in Jewish theology. Every Jew would agree with that, Paul. He's just bringing it back to what the prophets always said the whole time. You can say something and not do it. Well, that's still true, right? Remember James says the same thing? You want true, undefiled religion? It's what? You care for the widow and the orphan. Faith without works it's dead. I mean, this is normal Jewish theology. You can say something and not believe it. I find that today in pastoral ministry, very common. Very common. They'll say, well, I believe, and they'll describe their life. None of their lifestyle is like Jesus, but they say it, and I don't tell them to go to, I don't know where they're going. God have mercy on them, but I can see it. Verse 14. But when Gentiles or pagans, or what your translation says, non-Jews, when they do, those who don't possess the Mosaic law, when they do instinctively what the law requires, these, though they don't have the law, they are a law to themselves. They show that what the law requires is written on their hearts. That's like from Jeremiah, of course. To which, also in Deuteronomy, to which their own conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts will accuse them or maybe excuse them on the day when, according to my gospel, God, through Jesus Christ, will judge the secret thoughts of all. Even Gentiles who don't have a law telling them what to do, something on the inside tells them what to do. And he uses a particular word that the Stoic philosophers used all the time, and that was the word your translation, conscious. They're conscious, something tells them on the inside. In modern theological jargon or ethical jargon, we would call this the moral law, that all human persons can apprehend, probably all, maybe not psychopaths, sociopaths, but probably all humans can apprehend a moral law. There's something about that tells us. And it's the one thing almost no one ever disagrees with is their conscience. I got to follow my conscience. And Paul says, yep, I've known plenty of Gentiles like that. Even they don't have the law to tell them don't do it, they still know you shouldn't do it. And hey, their conscience is going to say, good job. They're going to excuse them, or it's going to accuse them. And we have a biblical term for that. It either convicts them, they feel guilty, or they don't. It's true. I bet many non-Christians will go, man, they feel guilty a lot, or they don't feel guilty, depending on what they did. Like the brother who had to leave the strip club because he felt guilty. He blamed his mom, but I don't think it was his mom at all. Mom wasn't there. But anyway, I grew up differently, is what he said. And the other brother's like, they're just normal people paying. They're good at their jobs. And I said in the podcast, so are rapists and so are gangsters. I mean, it's just the dumbest thing. Okay, verse 7. You have any questions? I'm going to go ahead. Anything else? So Paul set up a bad news story, right? So far, there's not much good news. I know. Welcome to church. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so Paul's setting up a sinful nature that everybody has. Yeah, and right here, he doesn't say, as it were, sin nature. Later on, he'll bring up some of that vocabulary. That's right. That's right. And you're right. I agree with you that she said, I might not do all the sins he listed, but I find myself in that as well. And I agree. You do a lot of those things. You're exactly right. I've watched you carefully for years, and I just want to affirm that. I'm kidding. No, but of course, I appreciate very much. You're right. The point is, and I think Paul would say, thank you. That's the point. Your favorite sin might not be on the list, but in a vice list, go through all the New Testament. One's going to hit you. And the point is, if even one of them hits you, you realize, oh my goodness, maybe I'm part of the problem. Oh, the nature. Yeah, yeah. Well, Paul's not nature. Yeah, yeah. You see yourself because of a nature. Right. Gotcha. So you're saying a selfish nature. Yeah, yeah, gotcha. And I don't remember Paul ever using the term selfish nature, but that sense of what we might call sin nature, he'll call it the flesh, which we'll talk about that. We will. Good. Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right. He sure will. He'll call it something. That's right. Verse 17, but if you call yourself a Jew and rely on the law and boast of your relation to God and know his will and determine what is best because you are instructed in the law, and if you're sure that you are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, a corrector of the foolish, a teacher of children, having in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth, you then that teach others, will you not teach yourself? Why you preach against stealing, do you steal? Do you forbid adultery? Do you not commit adultery? You that abhor idols, do you rob temples? You that boast in the law, do you dishonor God by breaking the law? For it's written, the name of God is blasphemed with the Gentiles because of you. And of course, Paul setting up is that you're being hypocrite. You can say, no, I'm not, I'm going to escape God's judgment because I'm a Jew. In general, that's exactly what they still say today. In general. If you talk to Jewish scholars, they'll find these verses and they'll say, this is ridiculous, Paul, you've gone crazy. I'm a good person and I'm a Jew and we know we have the law and I'm circumcised. And verse 25, circumcision indeed is of value if you obey the law, but if you break the law, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. Well, that's what the Gentiles were called. You're no different from a Gentile. Now that is them's fighting words, we'd say in Texas. I mean, they just called, if you Jews break any of these laws, you're just like a Gentile. So if those who are uncircumcised keep the requirements of the law, will not their uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision? That is, aren't they better than you? They don't have the law and they still do what the law requires. Then those who are physically uncircumcised but keep the law will condemn you that have the written code and circumcision that break the law. He almost certainly means at Judgment Day, they will be reigning with God to say, we're on the right side, you're on the wrong side. And that is unheard of in Judaism. No one spoke that way. Everybody, every Jewish document said no. The Israel will reign on the 12 tribes of Israel. They will rule over the Gentiles. And Paul's saying, no, those who do the law correctly, perfectly, we might be a Gentile. Verse 28, for a person who is not a Jew who is one outwardly, nor is true circumcision something external and physical. Rather, a person is a Jew who is one inwardly, and real circumcision is a matter of the heart. It is spiritual and not literal. Such a person receives praise not from others, but from God. And different Jews agreed with that. Some disagreed. Even to this day they do agree and disagree. That it's not about circumcision itself. It's about how they behave. They go back and forth on that. And Paul's point is external stuff just doesn't matter. It matters what you do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead. Matthew 7, yeah. Yeah, Paul says that. Uh-huh. Gotcha. I do. So it seems to me there were two questions. One is this Paul's way of saying if you've committed one sin, you've committed all sins, or you've broken the whole law? And is that related to Matthew 7 when he says, judge not lest you be judged yourself? On the first part, I